The NBA's free agency period every year is typically a time when the league gets shaken up a good bit with all of the player movement, transactions made, and rumors that come about, and this year has absolutely been yet another example of exactly that. We're 5 days in now, so most of the big names available on the open market have already found new homes, and while there is still some solid talent left, the dust is starting to settle a little bit. This brings us to today's video, where we'll be going through the 3 biggest winners of free agency and the 3 biggest losers of free agency so far this summer. These are the teams who have made the most of their situations if they fall into the winners column, or on the flip side, took some big hits that may hurt them in this upcoming year if they happen to fall in the losers column today. Before we start though, it turns out a good amount of you watching right now aren't even subscribed to the channel, so if you enjoy the content, consider hitting the subscribe button, as not only does it help out a ton, but I also very much appreciate it. Now with that being said, let's begin. We'll start things off with the first team that lands in the winners column today, being the Phoenix Suns. The Suns started things off this offseason with a bang, as they went out and acquired Bradley Beal from the Wizards for what seemed like pennies on the dollar. But after that move, they were left in a tough spot regarding how to construct the rest of their roster. They had a star-studded cast with Devin Booker, Kevin Durant, DeAndre Ayton, and now Beal leading the way, but they had no real money left to spend on the rest of the team, so they were relying on finding value through minimum contracts. Well, so far they've accomplished exactly that, finding some pretty damn good value to have added to their bench with these minimum contracts, nailing the situation. They found themselves in pretty perfectly. Eric Gordon is still a very good 6th man who can spark an offense, and they signed him on a minimum contract. Josh Okogie is a very good defender who has shown improvement shooting the ball, and then players like Drew Eubanks, Keita Bates-Diop, Yuta Watanabe, Damian Lee, and Chimezie Metu round out a pretty solid rotation for a team with championship aspirations. Now over to the first loser from this year's free agency period so far, we have the Houston Rockets. The Rockets entered this free agency period with a lot of money to spend, which is typically a good thing for a young rebuilding squad. They could have gone in a few different directions with that money that they had to spend, but the route that they took was probably the most questionable one of the bunch. After being rumored to have wanted James Harden all season long, that idea apparently got thrown out the window, and instead they gave Fred VanVleet a 3-year max contract worth $130 million, which in my opinion was a pretty gross overpay for a player who was coming off of a down year across the board. VanVleet is also now in the way of the player that the Rockets just drafted in the top 5 this year, Amen Thompson, who is also a point guard. Then on top of that, they paid Dillon Brooks a 4-year $80 million contract in a market where Dillon Brooks' value seemed to be at an all-time low, and I'm not even sure if they were bidding against anyone else for his services. Brooks is a culture setter, but not necessarily in a good way. His antics on the court ruined his reputation at the tail end of last year, and for a young Rockets team in some need of leadership in that locker room, Brooks is probably the last guy I would want to throw in that mix. Now back over to the winners. The next one up so far is the Los Angeles Lakers. The Lakers made a lot of good moves to put themselves in contention at last year's trade deadline, and it resulted in them making it all the way to the conference finals with that core of guys. The issue they were facing afterwards was that a lot of those players were impending free agents, and the Lakers were at risk of losing that progress. Now, as you could probably have guessed, the reason why the Lakers land in the winners column today is because they not only did retain almost all of their key guys, but they also added a few newcomers that can help out even more. First off, we have to address the fact that they successfully re-signed Austin Reeves after his breakout season, and they secured him on a much more team-friendly deal than most anticipated he would get, receiving $14 million annually for 4 years. Reeves definitely could have gotten bigger offers elsewhere, but the Lakers bringing him back was a big step in the right direction. They then then brought back Rui Hachimura and D'Angelo Russell on reasonable contracts, and on top of that, they signed Taurean Prince to bolster their frontcourt depth, and they added Miami Heat breakout point guard Gabe Vincent, who will give them some much-needed sharpshooting from 3 in the backcourt. The Lakers should now once again be near the top of the Western Conference this season, and they did it by making strong, shrewd moves in this period. Now back over to the next team to get classified as one of the bigger losers of the free agency period, we have the Portland Trail Blazers. The tension within the Blazers organization has been rising over the last few weeks during the NBA draft period and then the early part of free agency starting, but it all boiled over into a Damian Lillard trade request that most people could see coming a mile away. This is probably something that is long overdue, and amongst a few other things, it definitely contributes to them landing in the loser's side today. Lillard waiting until he did to request a trade and force this whole saga is coming at the direct expense of the Trailblazers organization. The team had just wrapped up signing Jeremy Grant to a 5-year contract worth $160 million the day before this news broke, with the team likely doing so to try to retain Lillard's best teammate from last year, only for Lillard to then give up and want out immediately after. Grant's contract is now an albatross of a deal compared to the production that Grant actually provides. They're also here because Lillard is being incredibly uncooperative with the front office, basically telling them to send him to Miami and nowhere else, when the reality is that Miami doesn't have much to offer in a trade. So now, this is almost becoming a hostage situation where Lillard is forcing the team to damage their own future at his expense. There's still so much that needs to play out, but there's no doubt that the Blazers wish things could have gone down differently. Now, for the final winner of the period we'll be discussing today, we have the Cleveland Cavaliers. The Cavaliers emerged in a big way this season, making the playoffs again for the first time since 2018, and they did so built on their dominant defense. They had an all-star caliber duo leading the offense in the backcourt with Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell. Their front court held things down defensively with Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen being one of the best defensive front courts in the league, but the small forward position was an area of weakness for them all year long. They needed more shooting on the wing, they needed a guy who could be relied upon to space the floor and give them an outlet on offense consistently, and they actually found 2 players that can do exactly that for them in free agency. They signed Max Strus to a deal worth about $16 million per year annually, stealing him away from the Miami Heat during the Heat's run to the finals, where Strus showed that he could be a quick trigger shooting talent that could be relied upon for a team looking to contend for a title. They also signed George Niang to a 3-year deal as well, and Niang is a guy who has shot over 40% from 3 for 5 seasons in a row now. And finally, the last team that finds themselves in the losers column today from free agency is the Philadelphia 76ers. The 76ers are coming off of a disappointing second-round exit from the playoffs, and after a whole season of James Harden's future hanging over their heads, it culminated in even more madness over the last few days. Harden did opt into the final year of his contract instead of choosing to hit free agency, but he then followed it up by requesting a trade. Because of this, the front office has had to put all of their focus into trying to resolve that situation, and in the meantime, they've seen most of their potential free agent targets sign elsewhere, leaving few alternative options for them. I just mentioned that George Niang signed with the Cavaliers, leaving the Sixers, Shake Milton went to Minnesota, Jalen McDaniels went to Toronto, and nobody is really biting on a potential Tobias Harris trade, so if they can't move him for pieces that can help fill out the roster, then their bench is going to be hurting again this year. Whatever happens between James Harden and the team will ultimately decide the rest of the team's offseason, because they could possibly exchange him in a trade for decent return, including some impactful role players, or maybe they could even land another star to pair with Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey. But only time will tell with that one, and right now it hasn't been looking very good for them. And with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below who you think has been having the best and worst period of free agency so far. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.